Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We want to thank you for attending today's NLPA webinar. Today, we will take a look at top procurement challenges facing businesses today and how to manage them. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of this presentation. If you have any questions, please post in the question box, and I will relay them to the presenters during the webinar as time allows. Now, I will hand everything over to Ron Crabtree. Ron?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Ron Crabtree. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. And NLPA had recently surveyed their global customer community about what would be their topical interests for webinars in 2020 and beyond. And top procurement challenges facing businesses of all kinds kind of came out easily in the top 3 things that we need to address. And inside of that, the survey really identified 4 key areas that topped out the list that we'll go take a look at here in the agenda in just a moment. But before I do that, just a little heads up, all of our panelists, and I'm gonna bet a large percentage of our audience are actually participating from home today. So we have dogs, we have children, so we can't promise there might be a couple of funny noises as we go. We'll just work through it together. All right, so here's those 4 things, right, that really came out as being critical. And we're gonna start with a polling question here after we introduce the speakers. But got 4 different world-class experts here. We'll introduce them, but there's really 4 big things really popped out of the survey. And we're gonna be, taking the temperature of our audience today as well as procurement processes, end to end. What's it take to get things done? People, process, and technology inside organizations. And then there's supply risk and sustainability challenges. And then logistical challenges. And man, have we been hearing about that of late with respect to, the coronavirus and disrupting supply chains for several industries. And then finally, IT and technological changes, Industry 4.0, and we have one of the experts on that topic here with us today. But before we jump in, let's just quickly start with getting introduced. I'm going to ask each of the presenters to take a moment, 30 seconds or so, and give a quick intro. We'll start with Greg Schlegel.
Thanks, Ron. Pleasure to be here with you today to talk about our passion, which is supply chain risk management. I am the founder of an organization called the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. It's about 26 companies, about 1,200 risk pros around the world. I teach supply chain risk management at Lehigh University and enterprise risk management at Villanova University. Been a long-time member of APEX, and essentially Ron and I go way back as APEX members.
Awesome, good job. Thank you, Greg. Pavan.
Thank you, Ron. A strange time that we're in right now, and it's so good that we're actually having this webinar. So thank you for everyone who's participating today. My name is Pavan Mazumdar. I'm the COO of Automation Alley. We are the Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center for the state of Michigan. And really our goal is to help our ecosystem, our manufacturing ecosystem, deal with digital disruption. And so we help build awareness, increase knowledge, and then eventually help companies take action for Industry 4.0 technologies. And that's basically digital transformation, big data, AI, IIoT, 3D printing, et cetera, all these technologies that are coming together and moving at exponential scale. And the way we do our work is we have a signature conference that we hold in November at the TCF Center in Detroit. We have weekly tech takeovers at our office, and now over the next few weeks, they'll be live streamed. And then we have something called Automation Alley R&D for the larger organizations that are really trying to look around the corner on what's happening with technologies. We help them with our academic consortium answer some of those questions.
Good job, thank you. Derek.
Thanks, Ron. My name is Derek Browning. I'm the Vice President for Supply Chain Solutions for Leancore Supply Chain Group. We have 3 brands. One brand focuses on training and education, doing a mixture of online, blended, and in-class training on supply chain and operational excellence activities, so Lean and Six Sigma. We've got a supply chain consultancy that will perform end-to-end assessments, functional area deep dives, and detailed deployment roadmaps for how to transform supply chains and then walk alongside of an organization through the transformation. And then we've got a managed transportation division that really emphasizes a a focus on the management so that we're a non-asset-based organization that does not broker freight. So we operate off pure management fee to drive waste out and really help improve the overall supply chain.
Good job, Derek. And Leancore was invited to be a panelist because they're really out there in terms of logistical challenges, dealing with many large organizations with global supply chains that are grappling with, and I'm sure you'll share a couple of stories as we go, some of the things that can just blow up a supply chain that's just basic logistical challenges that I think we'll find pretty interesting. And finally, David, please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is David Millington. Thank you, Ron. And I'm the Director of Education and Product Development for NLPA. I have over 18 years of supply chain process improvement experience. And I would like to personally, on behalf of NLPA, thank everyone for attending today's panel. It's an honor.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm Ron Crabtree, I'm the moderator. I'm the CEO and founder of MetaOps Incorporated. And we have a brand we call Meta Experts that's very focused in on, talent, interim and contracted talent to jump in and solve problems. And I've been very involved with some thought leadership. I had a 20-year career in the automotive supply chain, mainly in materials management, procurement. And since then, about 20 years working with organizations, figuring out how to leverage and get in front of best practices and trends and making things happen. So I've been a very keen student of Industry 4.0. I've been a very keen student of what's changing from offshoring, nearshoring, reshoring, and all of the issues associated with global movement of the products and goods that sourcing and supply professionals are near and dear. So thank you for joining us today. Let's move on and get into our first polling question. We have 3 polling questions today we're asking the audience to participate in. And we had the panelists kind of weigh in on these 3 things. And we're going to ask everybody in the audience to use the tool and pick which 2 of these 4 things are probably, from your perspective, most important and critical right now. Is it procurement processes, which is your internal people, processes, and technology, your internal systems, your ability to develop, manage the workforce, and have your internal organization ready to go, and your suppliers, right, with respect to the future, there's supply risk and sustainability and all the things that are going on that can blow up our supply chains. And then we have the increasing difficulty of logistical challenges. I mean, just little things like, and I think Derek will share a pretty funny story about some bugs popping out of a container maybe a little later, just little things like, we got to shut these 2 factories down in China for the next 2 or 3 weeks while they work through the virus issues. How can we get ahead of all those kinds of things? And then finally, and this is a big deal, and it's getting bigger every day, is understanding IT and technological challenges that are coming at us like a freight train, not only for us inside our organizations where we're the procurement and sourcing professionals, but also our suppliers. We need to be mentoring, understanding what's out there, and beginning to pull our suppliers in and get them engaged, because a lot of competitive advantage is really dependent on technology, and it's going to get worse, not better, in the years ahead. So Amber, I'll let you kind of watch for when we seem to have a quorum, and then you can share results from our audience, and then we're going to compare that to a little straw poll we took with the panelists. So Amber, I'll let you monitor this for a moment, and when you're ready, you can share the results.
Okay, wonderful. We'll leave it open for another 20 seconds. So those of you that haven't had a chance to submit your answers, please do so now. And everyone should see the results now.
Not yet. It still hasn't quite popped up.
Oh, okay. Is it still not showing?
We're not showing, but if you can see it, maybe you can report it to us.
Yes, I apologize. It shows it's sharing results, but for the first option, it came in at 45%.
Okay.
Second option was 57%.
Okay.
Third option is 26%.
Okay.
And the fourth is 49%.
Well, that's very interesting. So we purposefully kind of limited the audience to picking two. We wanted to get some gradation, you know, and kind of get a sense for it. So we had 45% was said it was item one, which would be procurement internal processes. Did you say it was 57% for number
That is
two?
correct. 57.
Interesting,
Interesting.
interesting, very interesting. And then 26% for logistical challenges, and then 49% weighing in around technology change. So what's interesting, and that's interesting, right? So I had the panelists take a crack at kind of giving each of these kind of a 1 to 5. And we had, like, from the panelist perspective, maybe procurement process challenges being number one. Our audience saw it as like number 3 based on the percentages. And then supply chain risk and sustainability being like number 2. Our audience clearly says that's number 1 of these different things. Logistical, we felt like was going to be roughly number 3. It came in number 4 in this particular poll. And then finally, with understanding IT, we were guessing it would be a little lower down the list, but it came in as number 2 in terms of this audience and your interest in what you believe to be the bigger challenges facing the world and us as procurement and sourcing professionals out there in the market. So thank you for sharing in the poll, and that gives us a little orientation about your interest. And we're going to roll on now to the first question. Now, how this is going to go is I'm going to have Greg Schlegel be number 1 for this question, followed by Pavan, Derek, and then David. For question 2, we're going to have Pavan start us off, end up on Greg. For question 3, we will start with Derek, and then end up with Pavan going last, okay? So with that, we're going to ask each of the panelists, really focusing in on their kind of specialty. In this case, risk and sustainability. We're going to start with Greg. So Greg, with respect to risk and sustainability, from your perspective, what are those top 3 big challenges that professionals are chasing, or facing, I should say? And then for each of those, could you share some of the reasons for that? So take it away, Greg.
You bet. Again, we in the consortium look at supply chain folks from a very critical risk lens. All right, we're not looking at performance. We review global supply chains from a risk point of view. So with that premise, we see 3. First is supply visibility, and that's taking a supplier dashboard, risk rating of your suppliers, and maybe even risk alert systems. Why? Why do we push visibility, especially upstream to your supply base? Because what you don't know about your supply chain folks can and will hurt you. Second, we advocate alternative suppliers or secondary sourcing. All right, why? It's an additional cost. Yes, that's exactly what people will say. But it's critical to surviving and thriving in what we call the VUCA world. What's VUCA? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which is what we're all experiencing right now in our supply chains. And last, think enterprise resiliency. It's all about culture, folks, all right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Think about enterprise-wide metrics. What's good for the enterprise, not necessarily what's good for the department. Those are our 3.
All right, good job. Thank you, Greg. Pavan, same question, only in your case, you're really focusing in on the technology side of this, Industry 4.0 and the technological challenges, procurement and sourcing professionals should be thinking about, concerned about going forward from your perspective. Take it away. What do you see as those top 3, and why do you feel that way?
Thanks, Ron. And before I kind of go, Greg, right on point as far as culture, and that'll come a little bit later when we talk about some next steps. But so from our perspective, which is the technology, sort of the 3 things that come up to the top are 3D printing, for example, is one of those areas. Additive manufacturing and 3D printing is one of those challenges that we think sometimes doesn't get a lot of attention. And the reason for that is we're still seeing a very subtractive manufacturing, much more assembly type of manufacturing. And why we say that that's one of those things that's a challenge is because it can have such a big impact on the BOM, because when we go from components to material, it sort of changes fundamentally what it is that you're actually sourcing. So we say 3D printing is our first challenge that procurement professionals should be looking at. The second thing is upstream and downstream digital integration. So we're seeing a lot of the larger organizations, challenged by things like traceability, tracking, et cetera, especially now that we're seeing, and we talked about this before with the new climate, we want to know where everything is at all times. We want to know where it came from. So things like blockchain technologies are being implemented, and that means you need to be able to be digitally integrated. That's a challenge because that's not necessarily a core competency sometimes in companies. And then the third one is this concept that we call unlimited memory, perfect recall. And what we mean by that is when you look at digital technologies, especially when they're overlaid with sophisticated mechanisms like AI, the process that these technologies will use and execute don't have to be constrained by traditional limitations like human ability. So a lot of the processes that we design today are designed because humans are executing them. But when you take that constraint away, it completely changes process design, and that can have a huge impact on how things happen within the organization. We also like to call that sort of the foundation of digital transformation, which is Industry 3.0 was about companies using technology. Today, we're saying Industry 4.0 is being a technology company that happens to be in the business of X. So I would say those are our three challenges that we're looking at.
Awesome. Good job on that. Thank you so much. Derek, with respect to logistical challenges and, what you guys are learning, working with so many great companies that are global and dealing with this every day, what do you think are the top three challenges procurement professionals should be aware of? And then why do you say that?
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable, kind of reflecting on the way that the responses came in a few moments ago. We're certainly in the midst of a very challenging time. And right now, our transportation group is taking daily inventory of what carriers are open and which carriers risk closing, which terminals are being disrupted. And so there's a heavy focus on the need for technology communication in that kind of high risk environment. If we think back to maybe how we would have felt 3 weeks ago, or even think if we can imagine ourselves going forward a few months once we're through some of these current challenges, really what raises to the top is not the major catastrophic risks that like we're seeing now, because what we're seeing now essentially it's setting a level playing field for many companies. So competition in an environment where all of your competitors are facing the exact same risks is much different than competition when your competitors are not facing the same risks or have different levels of preparedness. So what we see is logistics capacity disruptions as being a major risk from a procurement focus. And one of the examples that Ron alluded to, a customer of ours, one day they opened up one of their containers to receive in some product to the distribution center. And this big, large kind of batch of moths came rushing out into the facility. Immediately, the facility had to be shut down, and specialists came in to inspect and fumigate and make sure that it wasn't an invasive species. And so that was one kind of small, odd example of a disruption that really turned a supply chain sideways for a short period of time. And if you think about all of your supply base kind of having multiple scenarios like that at any given time, I think Greg was telling me earlier that a study said that most supply chains have around 11 risk incidences every year. And those aggregate up to be very substantial over the course of the year if you're not prepared for it. So the logistics capacity disruptions, I think, are very important for us to be focused on. And then in addition to that, the maintenance of long-term relationships and the balancing of short-term targets with long-term strategies. And so one of the things that we see in this highly disruptive, this VUCA world that we're talking about is this drive to try to focus on the short term and not think long-term about how we can partner with our suppliers and how we can partner with our channel network so that we can build a supply chain that can survive through minor risks and minor situations. So I see a lot of organizations, they will chase pennies at the expense of dollars, that penny wise, pound foolish. So my encouragement to purchasing folks is to be thinking long-term with your supply base and not always just focused on this next week's or this next quarter's targets.
Good job. Thank you, Derek. David, so with respect to internal processes, people, processes, technology, how we execute inside organizations, the people part of all that, what do you see as the top three things, challenges we need to be worried about, and why do you feel that way?
Well, I think that the top three challenges are the alignment and integration of procurement processes to the overall organizational process and corporate strategy. Secondly, the ability of procurement professionals to effectively manage and improve those process capabilities. And then thirdly, the inability of the procurement training process to effectively transfer the knowledge learned from training to solving organizational and operational problems. Now, on the matter of alignment of and integration of the procurement function processes to the overall organizational process, we see that there's usually an over-reliance on short-term goals and objectives, as was mentioned before, and competing silos with competing visions and competing goals that sort of disrupt the supply chain process. And then on the matter of the inability or the lack of expertise to improve and manage procurement processes, we see a weakness in the ability to measure process capability or procurement process capability at the root cause level. And as far as the lack of a transfer of procurement training and skills acquisition to solving organizational problems or supply chain problems, as we see in the times that we're in, that when there's a downturn or economic downturn, travel is on the chopping block, entertainment is on the chopping block, and training is on the chopping block. So there seems to be, at least from a leadership standpoint, in terms of the procurement function, an inability to rationalize and determine an effective return on investment on those training dollars.
Real quickly, I have a question that just came in as well. What do you think is more challenging, to partner and align with the business stakeholders or with the suppliers?
Who wants to take it first?
Yeah, I saw Rodrigo commenting on that as I was speaking about the importance of long-term relationships. I think more often than not, the paradigm that organizations are in is that there's this tension between their stakeholders wanting profit out of the organization and their suppliers that are wanting to protect their margins. And if we kind of walk in with that paradigm in mind, then it immediately sets negotiations up to be very much oriented towards value claiming, where it's kind of a zero-sum game. If we go in with an integrative approach and say, I think there's a way for us to work it out where we can deliver better results to our stakeholders, as well as protect and ensure longer term margins for our suppliers, then we want to integrate the mindsets and try to work together to create that kind of mentality. This is really one of the fundamental differences I've seen in highly integrative purchasing folks versus those that are more about kind of task focused or cost focused in their mindset. So I wouldn't say it's more challenging to do one or the other. The real challenge is to do both.
Okay, cool. Any other panelists want to have a quick comment there before we move on?
No, that was great.
Okay, great, awesome, good job. All right, well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and move on. I was going to talk a little bit about upside and downside risk before we moved on. And, if you're a restaurant here in Michigan, they shut down, nobody can sit in a restaurant now. So it's like, what happens to all that food coming in for the next couple of weeks until they open the restaurants up again? And then on the other side of it, and I bet Derek's got this phenomena, is we supply things that people want to buy right now. Lots of extra toilet paper, masks, cleaning materials, testing kits for coronavirus. And it's going the other way. It's like, that's an upside risk that, have to get really on top of. So with that, we're going to move on to question 2. And this time we're going to start with Pavan. So with respect to technology, what do you think are the top 3 benefits a firm could realize by finding ways to capitalize on technology challenges? And why do you feel that way?
So that's me, right?
Yep, Pavan.
Yeah. So, so from our perspective, there's 3 areas of opportunity that we can look at for any company. So the first one is, and I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what David said earlier, is when you in times like this, training kind of gets chopped off. But we think that there's actually huge opportunities in getting some skills and upskilling in what I would call the generic framework of AI, on how AI works for business. And then the reason for that is that the benefits are something that will not be necessarily obvious up front, but the cost of actually getting into it is surprisingly low. There's a ton of resources available online on how you can actually do better prediction, better scenario analysis, to Ron's point, on how you can pivot quickly if you have some of those frameworks already in place. So the first one is really get well versed with AI and AI tools and machine learning and all the stuff that happens with it. There's a ton of opportunity there. The second thing is to look at, in terms of an opportunity, is look at the entire product design and look at how something like additive manufacturing could radically change that design. And that has to be done in conjunction with engineering and the manufacturing side of the business as well. And the reason for that is because all those changes are happening at software rates. So what's not possible today could very quickly change in the future, because all those changes are happening exponentially. And then the third one is what we're calling sort of, process re-engineering in the environment where you might not be constrained by either ability or recall. And so if you have that first piece of AI and really understand how AI can impact different areas of the organization, and now what does the process side of the business look like with that information, there are going to be huge opportunities on how you can actually recraft that. Very quick example, if you're in a traditional business, let's say you have a traditional warehouse. A traditional warehouse is laid for human access, right? It's basically designed with aisles and bins and pick locations and things like that, where every item has a specific location. But if you look at an automated warehouse, none of those things matter, because if everything is going to be pulled and placed by a robot, that robot has unlimited memory and perfect recall. Now, how you optimize the positioning of those goods based on things like seasonality, demand, shipping requirements, etc., completely changes the way you would even think of laying out your warehouse. So that's an example of process redesign. Both are awesome processes. One was designed for human execution, and then the other is designed for robotic or automated execution.
Awesome. What a wonderful story. Thank you. Derek, you're up next. From a logistical perspective, what would you suggest?
Thanks, Ron. And really, I'm seeing a couple of comments come in on the live stream. One asking for strategies to simplify supply chain and reduce risk. Another asking how do we come up with procurement strategies or processes that are effective when a natural calamity occurs. And you'll hear me in my kind of 3 benefits just produce the opposite of the 3 challenges that I mentioned. So building relationships, crafting the strategy, and then balancing the short-term and long-term thinking. So if we think about strategies, I remember a project we did a long time ago when we were looking at the inventory in the supply chain and where we had that inventory located. We had 3 tiers of suppliers in the room, each of which were holding safety stock in their facilities on raw WIP and finished goods. So the total supply chain lead time was impacted. Total supply chain complexity was impacted, though it was not an intentional move to protect against risk. Now, in an environment where those 3 suppliers are not just kind of waiting for a ding to come at them or some type of fine to come at them, an environment where those suppliers are not waiting for the end of the year to receive a letter to tell them that they need cost reduction without any kind of formal work to get the cost out or the waste out of the system, you end up with these segmented silos that do not address cost, complexity, and risk effectively. In a world where we've got strong relationships in that network and strategy that is crafted not just myopically at the OE location or at the retail location, but it's strategy that is tied in a plan for every part type format through the supply chain, then you can have the right levels of stock in the right places with the right backup plans when something fails. And so something like a dual sourcing strategy, as Greg mentioned earlier, can be very expensive, but it doesn't have to be so expensive. It can be something that through strategy and relationships, it's just slightly more expensive than a single source, yet provides a world of protection in the event that a calamity occurs. Now, some of this then is driven by that balance of the short term versus the long term. If we're in the middle of a predicament like we are now, where we can go in and slice all kinds of costs and take advantage of supply chain partners because they're dealing with similar issues, or we can protect the long-term mutual prosperity of the supply chain, I'm always going to lean and address companies to go towards that long-term thinking so that we can have a robust supply chain that does not crack in times like this.
Good job. Thank you so much. Let's see now. David, you're up next.
Yes, so of the benefits of integrating and aligning procurement function processes with the overall organization and corporate process, as well as improving and managing the procurement function processes themselves, what are some of the benefits? Well, for sure, we would see in order to achieve that, in order to accomplish that, we have to have a greater degree of collaboration across the supply chain processes, upstream to our suppliers and even downstream to our customers, and as well as internally. This would foster, it would require the fostering of a culture of collaboration. And again, as Greg said before, culture eats strategy for lunch, any day, anytime. So, and then the benefits of really focusing and aligning and empowering the procurement training process to solve organizational problems that really focus on meeting customer needs and requirements. We would see a better return on investment on making the case for procurement training and skills acquisition, and not seeing the training on the chopping block. As a matter of fact, in the dilemma that we are in the crisis that we are in, training should be at the forefront, especially in the manner of how could we overcome such instances and such occurrences. So the tremendous benefits and the end result would be a lower total cost to serve and a lower total cost of ownership.
Good job, David. Thank you. Awesome. 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 Good stuff. So Greg, you get to do cleanup on this one.
Well, again, we'll take a risk perspective, and what I would do is just focus on the three challenges that we talked about earlier. First one is supplier visibility, all right? The benefits we see of having good supply chain visibility, early warning for things like weather, geopolitical risks, infectious diseases, which we're witnessing now, financial health of your supply chain, and more. So the ability to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage any type of risk faster than your nearest competitor, folks, that in our view is a strategic advantage. So remember this on visibility. Speed is life and time is money in supply chain risk events like we're living and breathing right now. Second challenge and a benefit of addressing that challenge is alternate supplier protocols. All right, one of the big benefits is if you have secondary sourcing, and we've all agreed it is a tough sell and it is a little more costly to build out redundancy in your supply base, But the benefit is if you do that, you will minimize your margin and your share erosion during a risk event like we're witnessing right now. And the third challenge and then the benefit associated with that is thinking enterprise-wide. Enterprise resiliency. Again, minimizing your margin and share erosion during a risk event. Why? Because if you're better prepared and more responsive to a risk event than your nearest competitor, folks, that to us is basically strategic advantage.
All right, good job. I can't add a lot to it. We're going to roll on to question number 3 here in a second, but it's all about differentiating at the end of the day, and all of these things converge. And if your organization is better at embracing getting in front of these things, you will be different than your competition, which means you have a competitive advantage, and with respect to the growth of your business, and reacting more quickly can make a big difference around the long-term loyalty of your customers as well. So with that, good job for the panelists. We're going to move on to the third question, and after that, a couple of polling questions. So we'll start this time with Derek. We'll let you take this first. Relating to logistical issues, what do you see as the top 3 recommendations that people go do? What do you say the top 3 go-dos, implements, pursue now from a logistical challenges perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It's really nice when you hear all these very lofty, thoughtful ideas, and then you're like, but what can I do in my role? And so I thought about this from the perspective of many of the purchasing folks that are likely listening in. There is a good chance that you are either in a very mature supply chain system, and it's got processes in place that require certain boxes to be checked and certain things to be followed in every sourcing decision that you make. Or you're in an environment where you're not mature at all and you have to create your own system. Okay? And then when you reach out to those channel partners, to those organizations that can support you in creating that system, many of the things that's out there are great at a strategic level, yet not always applicable in the context you're in. So I always encourage those purchasing folks, take the system, learn from it, see what its intention and what it's designed to do. And then rather than exploiting it for your short-term advantage, meaning that, hey, I've seen purchasing folks send notes across and they'll say, hey, if you can show me how we were able to take 15% cost out of this, then I can say yes tomorrow. And in behind that question, I know what's happening is there's a system in place, their bonus is tied to it, and they're trying to just kind of beat the system. So rather than exploiting the system, bucket, right? Look for how you can create value in the end-to-end supply chain. Secondly, to teach those around you, okay? So if you think about what you know about a supplier, about the industry, about the commodities, you tend to know more than the folks using them, okay? On the reverse of that, they tend to know more about how they're using it than you. So as much as you want to learn about how they're using it, you want to teach them about what's out there, what the risks are associated with different vendors that you may select or contracts that you may enter in. And then ultimately is to seek mutual prosperity. All right. One of the things that you're going to see in the coming weeks, and probably already talking about it, is what are we going to do about suppliers that just didn't make it through this scenario? They had to do layoffs, or there were so many disruptions that they could not perform business as normal through the whole disruption. And many of those suppliers are in that shape because their customers have put them in that shape and they didn't have another option. So I want to seek mutual prosperity. That does not mean that we're just letting money flow to vendors freely without question, but they're really building those relationships, understanding how vendors are using it and encouraging them to use it for more longer thinking and having good business continuity plans in place at the get-go.
Awesome. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you. Good job.
Very quickly, going back to David's comments, On items cut down during downtimes, what this person's seen in many industries and during many downturns, the items cut are those that management does not feel are building value to the organization. Does that mean management feels training of supply chain professionals is not worth the return?
Great question. Who would like to tackle that one?
Oh,
I'll offer up a quick thought here. And I think part of the challenge is most organizations really don't have a way of correlating the investment in people and training with the business result. And that's a big gap, right? So it's on us as sourcing and procurement professionals to be able to articulate upward to our leadership. What do we get by investing in that? What metrics are we going to move? What risk can we mitigate? What opportunities can we capitalize on? Any other panelists care to weigh in?
Yes, and of course, again, it's about focusing the training and development on fixing or addressing organizational problems. If that's done, and it's done within the context of understanding or selecting, for example, the top 3 challenges, and understanding the scope and the magnitude and the impact of those challenges on the customer and the stakeholders, and then designing the training package to address those problems and the clear goals in terms of the fiscal impact of the problem and the solution. The training has solved X amount of, or removed X amount of waste or fiscal impact from the process, then it was worth the investment. So the key challenges for us as procurement leaders to make that case of a strong return on investment before we do any training. And if that's done, then we would have presented a very strong, compelling case to continue training.
Okay, awesome. Amber, I think we handled that one sufficiently, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thank you. David, you just tackle this question next, but shorten your answer just a little bit because we're touched behind and you got a chance to say a couple of things you want to say anyway. So go ahead.
And which question is that?
Number 3. In other words, what do you think are the top 3 go-dos?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So the top 3 challenges would be to, number 1, the top 3 recommendations, right, would be to build a commodity team that's selected from the key stakeholders within the organization, and you could even include key suppliers and key customers. And they would leverage the strategic framework and align the procurement function process to the organizational processes and all of the supply chain processes. Then secondly, another recommendation would be to map and understand process capability at the root cause level and to develop solutions that would effectively remove process waste and unnecessary cost in the supply chain. And as far as this model, a learn it, do it model, to develop or to implement a training methodology where procurement professionals learn certain key skills within the procurement and supply chain profession that's aligned to solving organizational and supply chain problems. So the whole idea is to, in the planning phase, again, to understand again, perhaps the top 3 challenges that a supply chain organization faces, and select one problem at a time with a clear problem statement that articulates the impact of the problem on the business, on the customer, and then in the implementation phase. So the idea is that the training is designed and configured in a way to solve organizational problems.
Awesome. Good job. All right. So we're going to move on. Greg's also got a slide to go along with his answer as well. So we're going to switch over to Greg, and Pavan will take the cleanup on this one. So Greg, take it away.
very good. Yep. Hopefully this slide will be in the slide deck, but we took an operational, tactical, strategic approach in our 3 recommendations. First one, gain visibility into your supply chain. We advocate map your supply chain, folks, either manually and or digitally, and maybe you even subscribe to a supply chain risk solution out there who have hundreds, if not thousands of manufacturers. Some could be your suppliers, and they're rating them every day, all right? So you gotta gain visibility, map out your supply chain. Number two, from a tactical point of view, begin to assess your supply base and do it continuously. And I'll say one thing. There is a method out there called the Altman Z-score. Wikipedia, you can see it. It's a methodology, all right, where you use income and balance sheet data. That's all you need. There are two algorithms. One's for private companies and another is for public companies. And it has over a 90% forecast accuracy, folks, in projecting and predicting financial health and or bankruptcy 15 to 18 months out into the future. Who wouldn't want that as a procurement individual? And it's free. Wikipedia it after this webinar. Go out, get it, and start to use it. And strategically, as time permits, we advocate you develop what-if scenarios regularly and build out risk response plans. A few of us talked about AI and ML. We're big advocates of digital twins, of digitizing your supply chain, and then running scenarios using modeling to show how your supply chain will react to certain stimuli. And then on the left, I won't go through them, but this slide will be in here. This is from the Hackett Group, folks. This is 2019. These are what CPOs, Chief Procurement Officers, are doing every day for supply chain risk identification, assessment, and mitigation. So we wanted to share that with you.
Good job, Greg. Thank you. And then Pavan, you get to do cleanup on this one.
Excellent. So I'm just going to piggyback on Greg's response. So he's given me two items to talk about. So we look at digital transformation in terms of an approach and a methodology as standing on three pillars or three critical success factors. So the first thing is culture. And we've talked about that before, right? So most companies that tend to be in physical businesses tend to want a lockdown process. And that's not necessarily a dig, that's just how it is. When you're working with stuff, when you're working with manufacturing, any kind of a change that does not yield a final output or the desired outcome is expensive. So we tend to lock down process. The problem is when you do that in a digital world, you're actually reducing learning. So the first thing we need to do is create a learning organization that is resilient and tolerant of mistakes as long as it results in learning. So we need to have teams that create sandboxes that can try certain things without necessarily impacting day-to-day cash flow. The second thing is we need to look at finance differently. So traditional financial management and financial planning is based on capital allocation. It's NPV, net present value type analysis. We need to start overlaying on top of that what we call option-like thinking, which is you make small bets, but you don't necessarily know what the outcome is. There's not a financial return, but the return should always be learning. And then the third thing is technology. The access to technology today, especially digital technologies, is so much greater than it used to be even 5 to 10 years ago that there's really no excuse other than just having the time to put into that learning. And it's not just middle management and lower level people, even the C-suite needs to invest in upskilling so that they can all start thinking digitally. And then to Greg's point, those are the tools you're going to use to actually do that modeling, to do that simulation, to do that analysis and understand how some of these scenarios are going to impact the business. So it's culture, finance, and technology. Awesome.
Good job. Thank you. And I really can't add much to it. We're going to get into a couple of more polling questions here and get into wrap up here in a moment. But clearly there's no big bang solution. Like just implement this system and all your problems go away. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be incremental, right? You got to pick your battles, and that's going to take collaboration, right? Top down, side to side, right? Up and down our supply chain, and then top and down and across our functions. You know, got to come together and really zero in on what are the key leverage points, and let's make sure we get them right, because you're only going to get one chance to go to the well. So that's all I'll say about it. So with that, we're going to come back to Q&A here in a couple of minutes, but first let's do a couple of polling questions. So the first is, really interested in the response. Got to hear a lot here today, but what do you want to learn more about, right? So again, you get to pick two of these. What are the top two of these four topical areas we covered today in your mind that you really would like to learn more about? Amber, can you run that polling question for us?
Sure, I'm opening it now.
Perfect.
And it's open. Everyone should see it on their screen.
All right, and when you feel like we've reached the quorum, you can either try to share it or you can report back so that we can make note of that.
Okay, going to leave it open for just a few more seconds. I think maybe 20 more seconds, and then
Okay.
we'll close it out. We haven't had many people that have answered the questions yet.
Okay.
Some people cannot see the questions.
Some people aren't being able to see it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the poll questions will pop up on another screen or even in behind some other documents.
Yeah, so basically we're just picking the top two from your perspective that most interesting to learn more about with respect to today's four key topical areas.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. It looks like people are having difficulties with it, but most people that are typing in the chat box are saying 1 and 3.
All right, so process is number one, and logistical challenges
Yes.
seems to be the second biggest.
Yes.
All right, interesting. Well, we started out at the beginning, we had kind of one point of view, and then as we moved in toward this, at least the data we captured suggests maybe a little bit of a shift after listening to what we covered here today. So with that, let's move on to the final polling question for the day. If you can go ahead and close that down, Amber. And with respect to, the 7 leadership competencies, this is an ongoing poll that we've been taking in the NLPA webinars from month to month. And we'd like to get a sample from this audience. These 7 different major competencies, which 4 really stand out to you? We'll give you a moment to pick in your mind the top 4 you think are most important. We do see the panel here. Leading corporate strategy planning process, design for strategic procurement, strategy for corporate strategy, aligning with functional strategies with SCORE, procurement function effectiveness, and big picture, tying it all better, making it sustainable. So we'll give folks a moment to weigh in, be interested in that feedback.
The polling question is open. If you do not see it, please minimize the video screen to see if it is in a separate pop-up. Oh, they're coming in now. It looks like people are able to do it this time.
Perfect.
Okay, I'll leave it open for another 15 seconds. So get your answers in as soon as you can.
While that's coming in, I see a question from Mohammed. Says new to the procurement world and sees that asking what kind of certificates or training opportunities are out there. I'm curious, David, if you can maybe give a brief kind of overview of some of the exciting things LPA has.
All right, thanks for sharing the results, Amber.
I'm sorry.
So, go ahead, David.
Yes, so our level 1 certification is underpinned by best practices, and many of the best practices we spoke of today, aligning the different processes across the value stream, selecting your commodity team, working with a strategic buying plan, etc. All of in that certification, you have all of the negotiation skill sets, the developing a sourcing strategy, etc. that you would need to effectively function as a procurement professional in the space. And then we have level 2, which goes to globalized procurement. Our level 3 certification focuses on managing the procurement function from the tactical and the operational levels. And then we have level 4, which will be out soon, which is managing the procurement function from the executive or the senior level standpoint, which sort of it ties in all of the other levels.
All right, very good. Amber, if you can close out the poll, please. All right, very good. So with that, we'll get into wrap up there, and I want to thank everybody for your time. And just one thing I wanted to emphasize is, especially with what's going on right now, there's never been a better time to stop and say, wait a minute, maybe there's an opportunity for virtual training. Start pulling people go put together virtually across our supply chain and really look at what are we doing and what can we do right now. And right now is an opportunity to say, look, we've got things are disrupted. We've got people at home working, whatever. You know, one opportunity is some customized, mentored attack. In other words, put our heads together, figure out what are those top 3 things, draw from the commercial off-the-shelf basic content, the 4 different training programs David described, and let's go after it, right? You know, pick those real challenges, train up and develop people where they need it with those specific particular skills, and then go do it and make it happen. So I strongly encourage you, if that's of interest, to reach out to David Millington. His contact information is here. dmillington@nextlevelpurchasing.com, and his phone number as well. So you can make note of that and it'll be in the recording. So with that, awesome. We are down to, this is what we covered today, right? Thank you for participating in the polling questions, and got our 4 world-class experts to really talk about these major key areas that fell out from the original survey. And then thank you for participating and helping us understand prioritizing learning in future webinars and content coming forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to Amber for our final round of Q&A, and we'll get into wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Right now, we don't have any pending questions that I have to share with you guys. So if there are any in the next 2 minutes, please feel free to send them in so we can post them as quickly as possible.
In the meantime, the panelists can flip through some of the chat. Whoops. If you go to more, and then you can go to chat, you can scroll through and see what folks have been putting into the chat messages. So if any of the panelists spot something there you'd like to comment about, feel free to do so.
It looks like I saw a question come in around demand forecasting, its ability to support purchasing folks on a new vendor selection for maybe an expensive part. I'm curious to hear some of the panelists' takes on this. I know one of the struggles that we've seen is the inability or the challenges with an organization to provide a fantastic forecast for a new part, because they're not sure whether or not it's going to be a strong use or high use, or and so curious what the panelists have seen there by way of solutions.
I'm going to take a real quick crack at it. And part of the challenge there is every industry's got its different requirements around information and how it's going to be exchanged. You know, I recently had the opportunity to work with a company that was repairing helicopters, aircraft, and they had all these major OEMs providing different components, and then they have a layer of, you know, regulations and systems they're supposed to be compliant with because it's government mandated. And there were so many different kinds of systems to try to share the information, is the inability to seamlessly share the same information about the same item. I mean, they were discovering 12 different part numbers across the supply chain for the same item. So how do you aggregate and really plan if you have that kind of a fundamental headache? Any other panelists care to weigh in?
Yeah.
All right. I spotted another question here in the chat that kind of caught my eye. Does any of the panelists would care to weigh in? Do you see, let's see now, what are some trends in automation in procurement? The operative words here, in procurement itself. Are there any trends you guys have seen you could share in terms of automation in procurement? I'm thinking about source to pay and some of that kind of technology, which has been out there a while. I didn't know if you guys have bumped into anything It's on the edge. Okay, well, good. Well, Amber, I see we've reached the top of the hour.
I have one question that came in. Oh, yeah, we have. Real quickly, I don't know if we have time for this question or not, but what are the recommendations panelists have for going forward regarding systems and processes for working remotely?
I think I had some latency on the previous question. So let me kind of talk. On the automation question, one of the things that we're seeing is when you look at kind of the work that fills a procurement person's day, there's a section of that work that is around exploration, problem solving, learning about suppliers and building those relationships. And then there's a section around some of the analytics and activities that you know are more algorithmic than say what would be needed for a problem solving type thinking process. So we're seeing a lot of technology being launched in that data collection, data analysis type area to improve and make that faster so that they can free up more time to do the more thought exercise and communication exercise. So that's one of the automation things, and that ties in with the remote. I'm seeing a lot more cloud-based activity. We're watching right now an MSA that's being negotiated through Redline via a shared document online, and so you've got a vendor and a purchasing person with a lawyer all working on the same document together, and it reduces the overall lead time associated with taking it from one group to the next to the next.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Derek.
I can take a quick crack at the question about working remotely, systems and processes.
Please.
So I'd kind of piggyback off what Derek said. I mean, you know, the more you move to systems on the cloud, the more real it becomes because you no longer have the restriction of being on premise. Some of the things that we've seen in terms of making that a reality is you need to have a great a collaborative system that is being able to have decision-making mechanisms that do not require in-person contact. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't pick up the phone and make a phone call or use some kind of a video conferencing system to connect as necessary. But we see sometimes in a 3.0 world, so much work gets done on email that when you're actually using collaborative systems in a 4.0 world where it's digitally integrated, the collaboration takes place in the system and outside of traditional communications type infrastructure. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is having systems that are resilient to just work anywhere, regardless of whether it's at home. So, you know, that means you could be in a coffee shop when times are normal and your systems don't break down. And if that can translate, then, you know, you can be multi-location, you can be pretty much anywhere. And we're seeing more and more of those possible. But usually it comes down to bottlenecks in communication and bottlenecks in decision-making. If those can be resolved, pretty much everything falls into place.
All right.
I got one more that I can answer. There's this question about how to increase resilience against the coronavirus in the next 4 months. I would say this, we're running out of time. The consortium put together a one-pager. It's a PDF. It says what to do now in the next 30 days, action items, and what to do in the next 60 to 90. I will send that to Ron, and perhaps he can share it with all the attendees. So I just wanted to touch base, sir.
Thank you, Greg. We'll take a crack at that. So with that, Amber, I think we need to get into wrap up. I want to thank our audience for sticking with us, and those who watch the webinar as a recording. We hope you'll also get some significant value, even though you might have missed some of the opportunity to offer your thoughts. So with that, we thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.